All right, everyone, thank you so much for showing up tonight. Tonight we have the interactive workshop, The Dynamics of Dialogue. And so really want to dig into a couple of key points when it comes to dialogue and then go through a few exercises to help us hone our skills. So now, how do people really talk? As real people, we're always jumping between subjects and ideas because of the idea that one thought will spark another because of certain associations. We stammer and stutter, saying and especially when we've been up since 3:30. But we also pause in the middle of sentences and things like that, and we also talk over each other. And I think that's something that doesn't come through in a lot of writing is when people talk over each other. And that is just so common. I'm sure we can all relate to that. But when we write, we're not just trying to replicate how that average person speaks. We are actually providing that meaning using creative interpretation that actually adds to the plot, that enhances, develops, helps us determine the character trajectory or convey that to the reader. So, that down there. Creating and resolving conflict through dialogue. So, in this small exercise, like what you can do is pick up the novel you have nearest to you. Hopefully, you have something around your desk or wherever you're at right now, and just open it up to any page with dialogue and read a few lines. So, from just a couple of lines in this novel, you should be able to learn more about the plot and the characters. What are the conflicts that they're facing or the tension between these characters. Now, when you're writing, consider everyone's different agendas and how those come into conflict against one another. For example, you can have, protagonists that have agendas that actually create conflict. Even on the protagonist side, isn't always just the antagonist causing tension or conflict. So, for an example, we have here John Kennedy Toole's A Confederacy of Dunces, where a 30-year-old lower middle class man with a college degree speaks with a black man working in a shady strip club because he doesn't end up in jail. So about employment and class issues. And in this dialogue, it is through the dialogue that you actually get a taste for they convey, they communicate someone's social and economic status, where someone's from, the type of work they do. And this is actually something I studied extensively while finishing out my own degree. Is I really dug into dialogue and how dialogue and fiction can convey these types of things. So and not just those surface factors, which are really important, but the agenda and everybody's needs and desires. And in the first week of the month, or the first workshop of the month, we went over creating characters and making sure that our plots had enough conflict and tension. But that's really based on the character's motivation and agenda. So when we talk to these different people, not only can we gather, or when we read this dialogue, we can not only gather where they currently stand, but then the dialogue gives us cues as to their desired trajectory, where they desire to be. Once we know where they are, then it's much easier to deduce where they want to go. So again, now another one we can do is open up one of your own recent works to a spot where you created dialogue, and then ask these questions to kind of keep moving it forward in your writing. So, who are the characters? What conflicts exist between them? And is there any give and take between them? Like, does someone yield? Is someone more submissive? Are they both kind of alphas or type A personalities? And what kind of dynamic does that create? Or are they both really, really compromising? You know what I mean? Because I think early on in my own writing, I used to have both people be very compromising. I was like, that doesn't work. Of course, we all grow as writers. So it's something I could recognize. But, what if anything resolves or will resolve this conflict, and how? So, what does a character come to a conclusion of, and the dialogue that helps them resolve the conflict. So, Becky, I think this is a good point for an exercise. And since you just finished your novel, would you mind sharing a point in dialogue and kind of walk through these questions with us?
Okay. Um, let's see. Here we go. Emma has just told her son, let's see, Emma's son, we're talking about the fact that they have to move. And they have really good friends, an older couple named Tucker and Caroline. So, let's see. The characters are Emma and her son Michael, and the conflict exists that she has to move from where they live to 3 hours away to get a better job because where she lives now she can't make ends meet, and she's a single mom. Well, she's a widow, and the conflict is that he doesn't want to move. So he asked, if they told their friends that they were moving yet, and she says, "No, son, not yet. I want to make sure I get the job first." He says, "I have a confession." Michael fidgeted, never looking up from his video game. "I prayed you wouldn't get the job. It was selfish, but I don't want to leave Sweet Grove. I love it here. It's a wonderful town, but if God has plans for us elsewhere, then we can't say no to that, can we?" Michael shrugged. "I guess. Plus, this new job pays more money. You'd have a bigger place to live, and you could probably get a dog. I'd rather stay here and have a dog." Sorry, it doesn't work that way. Or sorry, it doesn't look like that's an option. Emma's emotions pulled. She wanted to provide a stable home for herself and her son. Sweet Grove felt more like home than the town in West Virginia where she grew up. If she could, she would live in this town forever. You know that praying to God isn't like writing a letter to Santa, right? "I know, Mom. I'm 16, not 6. So,
That is hilarious.
thank
Oh my
you.
gosh. Yep. So, and I think you definitely do tell us, what, if anything, will resolve this conflict between them. So, the give and take between them, they're definitely a back and forth, even though he's reserved, right? So, how do you intend them? Is that how you intend them to be? Or,
I'm sorry, what was that again? Oh,
so
the dog
like
barking background.
the give and take between them?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you kind of balance that push and pull, and kind of what did you intend for there to be, like, that power balance between them?
Well, he's a 16-year-old boy, and he feels like he's the man of the house,
Yeah.
even though, he doesn't have a job, and all he does is play video games every day. So there's kind of, it has to balance because he's like, "Oh, do we have any pepperoni rolls?" And she's like, "Well, did you cook any while you were playing video games all day?" And
Awesome. So she still remains dominant, right?
oh yeah, because well, for one, she's the adult and she has all the money.
Mm-hmm.
So, but also he recognizes that the reason why they moved to town was so she could find her birth mother.
Oh.
And he doesn't, he wants a family deep down. He wants, even if it's not
family.
Yeah, even if it's not cousins and aunts and uncles, he at least wants some grandparents because he's never had that.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Yeah. So definitely, thank you for sharing that with us. Carol, do you have an excerpt to share of your dialogue?
Okay, honestly, dialogue is probably my weakest element, and yeah, I'm mostly a fast writer, but I definitely have engaged in playwriting quite recently.
Okay.
My
Awesome.
play actually got accepted into a Futures Female Festival.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing.
And the current play I'm writing is a kind of inspired by the Trump era.
Yeah.
And a presidential election were centered around probably the first Asian American presidential candidate that made it high enough. and yeah, it's a very big on kind of like one of the most ambitious things I've done. It's an ensemble cast, but curiously, I choose deliberately not to reveal a lot about the politician character. It's more about people talking about her than her herself.
Oh, that is really cool. I love that. Because that's what we see, right? That's what kind of defines someone for us in our mind is what everybody else is saying, right? That's so cool. Oh my goodness. So do you have any like points where two of your what you would say maybe main characters where they're involved in dialogue and any conflict that is the cause for that dialogue?
Dialogue. Well, okay, now I'm trying to think of a moment. So give me a moment.
Oh yeah, definitely. No worries.
Yeah, it's more like there's a separate scene that kind of is a critique on white liberalism and talking about a presidential candidate where that talking about, okay, is this candidate too violent looking? Should this candidate shut up?
Mm-hmm.
And then there was an argument saying that, hey, but this person is actually bringing out the truth. And they're arguing about two Democratic liberal candidates, one that kind of plays to the other side and make compromise, but the other that doesn't take the trash of the conservatives, the current conservative party.
Yeah.
And one's an activist, one's a politician. And it becomes an argument between who's the better candidate.
Okay. So were you, was there any yield between them, or is it because that they're so fervently for their position that they don't back down? What actually ends up resolving this conflict?
Okay, so this is a play that kind of is focused on segments. So
yeah,
I don't think things are pretty resolved yet. The play is actually done in the point of view of one journalist character. Mm-hmm. And these segments like that are kind of more symbolic of a wider conflict.
Yeah, definitely. I could feel that. Absolutely. So basically gives both of them arguing their points and then on to the next thing without a resolution, right?
Yes.
Okay. So neither one of them backs down, and that's another, another dynamic too that definitely presents itself. So, is there anything? So you said you feel like your weak spot is dialogue. Did you struggle with writing this, or did you feel like you were pretty in the zone, so it was easy to write it?
Okay, with this one, I'll say, this is a play I work a little bit on every day whenever I can, and it's like I believe it's now only 22 pages long so far.
Okay.
One act. It could be two acts. I don't know. I think it's going to be one act, honestly.
Yeah.
And okay, comparatively, I don't think I struggle as much with like screenplay writing work because, I don't know how to make. I'm not too experienced with making dialogue interesting sounding. I don't want to go too expositional. In fact, honestly, I'm more of a visual person.
Yes.
Screenplay writing.
Yep, absolutely. And I found the same thing with screenwriting and playwriting during when I had to do it, and it was almost easier because you're supposed to leave certain room for the audience to interpret your message. So definitely. So do you have other works in progress that are more along the lines of genre fiction or something like that?
Genre fiction? You mean prose?
Yes.
Normal prose. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one that does come to mind is a very unfinished novel. Like only one chapter of a first draft is ever done, and I hope to get back to it. It's about a little girl living in a dystopia society.
Oh, yes, I love those.
And the opening is her and her mom, and it's a kind of society where the adults are more susceptible to this deadly disease than they are than kids, and kids are kind of being trained and apprenticed to take care of themselves when the adults die out.
Yeah.
And it's a scene where I believe that, if I recall, I don't remember my own walk too much.
That's okay, though.
But there's a bit of tenseness in the scene with the mom telling her, why are you spending your money on chocolate instead of a necessity?
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, I guess the scene sort of resolved itself with the girl going, hey, Mom, don't you want some chocolate?
Ooh.
And the mom goes, and she no longer submits to it, even though she's sick. She takes a piece of chocolate just to appease her.
Yes. So the mother is more yielding in this case than the daughter.
Yeah, but the mother is trying to get her to practice practicality, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. All right. So something I have written to share with you guys. It's definitely, I've got a lot of action here. I guess I don't have the dialogue between my protagonist and antagonist, but one that kind of strikes me here is I open it with my character is a gas station attendant, and she is basically staffing the register at rush hour in their little town. And so she has this old lady come up to the counter and say, so it starts out with, yeah, give me those menthols. And Lucia responds, these? Nah, to your right. Yeah, those there. Lucia forced a smile as she rang up the woman's order. The evening rush hour hit, and the store quickly filled with tired, irritable customers. This woman, a regular named Tammy, had to be around 65 years old. It kind of goes into more description, and then basically Lucia's talking about how she doesn't think the woman, so there's a little bit of internal dialogue here. She doesn't think the woman should be smoking because her body is basically so wrecked from smoking and drinking and things like that. So she's having little internal dialogue, and before she can resolve the conflict, but she does have to yield, right? So she has to yield because it's in her position. She even, it's not her business. Her business is running the cash register, not advising people on their health, right? So she has to yield, and the conflict is resolved because, it's not her place to do that. Even though the other woman too, she's nice and she's sweet, and she even says, starts to try to provide Lucia with some advice before some action happens in the scene. But there's definitely that yielding from Lucia that kind of speaks to her, just moving on, going through the motions of her day, despite what all that's going on in her head. So that is just a little piece. The rest is kind of really focused on, because it's a mystery, it's a thriller, so a little bit of both. And it just doesn't end up being a lot of conflict in this first scene that I have pulled up, more of a reaction and dialogue for plot points. But hopefully that is helpful. Becky, feel free to ask me questions to hone this up. I don't want to.
I will. I keep forgetting I'm muted.
That's hilarious. Oh my goodness. Okay, so go. You're totally muted. Let me pull you up here.
Okay, so
Tuesday, right? Yes. I'm so excited.
one of the I like the part of your dialogue with, where she's describing the woman.
Yeah.
Because when I read that before, because I've read that before, right?
Yes, you have.
And that's one of the things that stuck out with me was like that's definitely someone that that woman, like you being the reader, she is someone you've run into at 7-Eleven.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yes, the real person that we have all seen every time we're stuck in line at the gas station.
And I think that those kind of descriptions really help with the dialogue.
Yeah, so then we kind of get a feel for who people are.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, and it makes it easier to hear the dialogue in our head.
Yeah. And I guess another point is when so Lucia, this car crashes through her station, and in the front seat is her dead ex-boyfriend. So that's where the mystery comes in. And so her new boyfriend, is a state trooper that is local to that area. So he is, they're of course talking, and he's staying with her. So he's trying to ask her questions to help his buddy because she's too upset to talk to people, and so he's helping get that information from her. And he had problems with the people. Basically, her ex-boyfriend was a drug dealer, so he had problems with the people he dealt for. He owed them a lot of money, and they always threatened that if he didn't get his shit together, they'd and then of course she begins crying. So, but I guess where the conflict arises in this point is that the law enforcement personnel that I have in this part of the story, actually she's talking to Dan, which is the lead detective, and so she's talking to him, and he's trying to get her to calm down. So the conflict is she is too shocked and upset by what has happened, and seeing that little old woman get hurt. She is too upset to give the information that he needs, and the resolution comes in. I guess I can let's see. So she raises her hand to her mouth as the realization hit her. He threatened to kill himself if I didn't come back. Dan asked a nearby officer to grab Reese as Lucia broke down into sobs. So they reassure her that it's not her fault. And then she is, of course, going, oh, he said he was going to get clean and stuff like that. He was trying to get better. And then Dan he yields at this point because he knows that she's too upset to get enough information from any good information. So he sends her home. He has Reese drive her home. So Reese drives her home, and that's basically the resolution of that point of small conflict between those two characters, where Dan is trying to get the information and she is unable to. So that causes, I guess, and then conflict. What do you think, Becky? You're muted.
Yeah, you're sorry. You're right on the mark.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. I don't want to do this just to hear myself talk. So.
No, you're fine.
Yes, we can all learn. We had so much fun. Yeah, these are too much fun. So, okay. So definitely, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, go. Oh my goodness. Oh. I gotta figure out what's wrong with my computer. It's frozen again. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Awesome. Thank you. It's frozen. I hope it doesn't crash again, guys. Okay. It's just really giving me a hard time about everything. It's like I can't even change the slide. Oh my goodness. It has not acted up like this at all, guys. I'm sorry. We're having these little tech issues. This is so bizarre. Oh my God.
I saw the Wizard of Oz for a sec.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to get back to, okay, so here's one. Okay, now we're going to move forward. Okay, now I know where we're at. It was going back and forth like,
It's okay.
oh my God.
Technology.
Yeah, apparently I don't know what I got to do to this thing. It was fine all day long. So anyway, so dialogue drives the plot. You know, we definitely want our dialogue. You know, in real life, it's made up of all the little chatter, but in literature and what we write, it has to drive the plot. So one thing I love about Louis L'Amour, for example, no matter what happens or what is spoken, it always adds the advancement of a character or enhances the setting or advances the plot. So, you know, depending on what you're writing, you might rely more or less heavily on dialogue. So, for example, can you think of any, and go ahead and either type this chat in the chat or go ahead and shout it out, but any books that you've read that are overly filled with dialogue, you know, and I don't even just mean play, like, so Carol, you're definitely writing a lot of dialogue. It's very heavy in dialogue at this point, which you need for what you're writing. But any fiction, if you remember any fiction that you have to write or that you've read before that has a lot of dialogue, go ahead, jump in real quick. I've got one if you guys have one. Can you think of one, Becky? Oh, I see chat. Yay.
One of them, trying to think. Like, it seemed to me like the Grapes of Wrath had a lot of dialogue.
Yeah, probably.
John Steinbeck, he, you know,
Ooh, Kiss
his
of a
characters
Spider
talk a
Woman.
lot.
That sounds cool. And what was that last one, Becky?
Just John Steinbeck in general. He had,
Oh, yeah.
like the Grapes of Wrath, you know, and
Oh, Jack London. Oh, my God.
yeah.
Jack London is like in The Iron Heel. Oh, my God, there's so much dialogue in that. You can hardly tell what is happening. Another one that is really, really heavy in dialogue is Pride and Prejudice. So if you guys remember that classic.
Oh, good Lord, yes.
Yes.
It's very dialogue heavy.
Yes, very, very dialogue heavy. Oh my gosh. Sometimes it was to the point where I was like, oh my God, stop chattering on about all this crap. I didn't see how all of it related to the plot. Now, disclaimer, I seriously love that book. But yeah, there's some points I'm like, why, how does this add to the plot? Oh my God, I'm so bored. But yeah, so great examples. And then think about it this way. Would The Wizard of Oz be the same if Dorothy hadn't said, Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore? And this single line of dialogue does drive the plot. Does anybody want to give a stab at why it does drive the plot? Just this one little line.
Well, it kind of says that, you know, to the reader that obviously the surroundings are so different that there's no way it could be Kansas.
Yeah.
Dorothy's away from home. This sets the goal of the, well, I've seen the movie, but the book too. She
Yeah.
has to go home. That's the heroine's journey.
Absolutely on point. Yep. She's not at home, and guess what? It sets the driver for what her goal is, what her goal and desire is. Nailed it, Carol. Awesome. So, other questions we can keep in mind when we're writing dialogue to make sure that it's actually driving our plot. So, does the dialogue make sense, or can it, if like we could just remove this, would it affect the plot negatively? You know, so could I remove certain things that Dan and Reese talk about? You know, that's definitely something I have to have Becky look at. No, I definitely, you know, we all have to look at that and see if I chop this piece of dialogue, does it take away from the plot, you know, or does it help actually clean up my writing? So will my characters will something my character says create tension for the reader and make them want to keep reading? So we definitely want that drama, that tension, so that then we get the resolution, and of course that release from knowing the resolution, knowing the answer to the mystery, for example. Another one, does this dialogue improve my character's situation or make it worse? So of course that can definitely add to the plot by adding like smaller points of conflict. If, for example, my character went nuts and started acting violently, it would change the plot entirely. So, and if she acted violently, they'd probably put her in jail or something. So, she can't. And if she said something like, "I'm glad he's dead," or something like that, then, of course they would suspect her or put her, suspect her of aiding in his death or encouraging him to kill himself. So, it's definitely, can you think of any situations where your characters might have reacted differently and given dialogue in a way that would change the plot? So, and then also, is your character ever being told something that weakens the resolve or strengthens it? So, sometimes our characters can wish they had done something differently. And I think, for example, my character's um, love interest, he absolutely tells her things that strengthens her resolve. And he, of course, being in the role that he's in, supports her and helps her stay strong through this. And of course, one of the antagonists, he does work to weaken her resolve, to weaken her curiosity and desire to see a resolution. Now, dialogue develops characters. Readers should be able to identify your characters based on their dialogue. And again, this is something that I studied intensively because I absolutely geek out on it. Dialogue as it conveys or communicates where our character is from geographically, which is, definitely dialects and not just like country, but, different regions like Appalachia. Someone from West Virginia, the mountains of West Virginia, is going to sound a lot different than from someone down in southern Georgia. So, does your character have any speech impediments? There's actually, there's a couple of good ones. Stephen King seems to do speech impediments a lot. Your character's educational and socioeconomic background. Now, there is that difference we mentioned before from Toole's work, but again, this is something that you can use either way. So you can either just plainly convey it, or you could use it in a way that throws the reader off. So you could have a character speak in certain ways around certain people, keeping that language compartmentalized for when it's most useful to them. So, but if you're ever stuck, write a journal entry or two as your character and learn their speech patterns and habits. So really go in deep and try to be your character. And a lot of times that feels like us. There's a piece of us in every character. But what other conflicts are going on in their lives that are driving them? And okay, let's think about that real quick. Becky, I would say, can you pick one of your characters and describe their speech patterns and habits?
When I was writing my Haunted Women stories,
Mm-hmm.
that was one where each story was set in a different state within the Appalachian regions of the United States, 13 in all total. So I really had to adopt, like when I was writing characters in Georgia, they didn't speak the same as characters in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Or they, like the ones in Ohio, they were like West Virginians with a little less like hillbilly twang,
Yeah.
because the ones in West Virginia were, well, not West Virginia, maybe Kentucky. They had a little bit of a twang. The ones in West Virginia, they were coming down from like Pittsburgh, and they were going to DC. So they stopped in a tourist town. They were very educated and a little nerdy. And then with one of my favorite characters, and the one I just did was the one I literally just finished today. He's a cowboy, and he refers to women as ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
And
Awesome.
yeah, and that's like his thing. He's very polite, and he says, "Yes, ma'am." And the woman who is his like about the same age as he is, she's like, "You don't have to call me ma'am," and she gets a little offended by it. So
Yeah, I love that. That is such a great habit to have them, say certain things afterward. Not just a dialect, but how they actually address other people can be a good indicator of their character,
yeah,
and how they fit into a plot. So, what would you say are the conflicts that are going on in his life, and how does the dialogue convey that?
um, he is very shy, but it comes off almost as standoffish, and like it's not very prominent in this book, but it will be in the next one because people will learn about his background and how he was bullied as a child and how it got him in trouble and things like that. So
Yeah.
they will it's definitely going to come out like more in the next book because the next book is his story.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to read that one too.
Yeah, and they're like 6 total. It's crazy.
Yes, awesome. And Carol, what about one of your characters? One that you could pick out as having very particular speech patterns and habits that convey who they are.
Well, okay, the easiest one I can think of isn't even a draft that's been written out yet. It's kind of like a first draft written, but I have yet to apply to the new draft. But
Mhm.
in a kind of sci-fi concept, I apply to a genre of fiction that I want to turn into a pilot script. There's a character that speaks nothing but Japanese.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is, the goal is that it's actually untranslated to the audience, unlike the usual tradition.
Hmm.
But she has a translator who sucks at translating.
Oh,
They only translate parts of these things.
oh,
And the thing
wow.
is that this character, who's kind of like designed to be a space samurai of some sort, the point is she actually feels empowered by speaking her own language, even to people who don't understand her.
Oh, wow. That is
And
really cool.
she's more of a facial expression person, and her captain who hired her kind of has to interpret her constantly and argue with her through that translator, which kind of develops some of the tension and the humor of it.
Absolutely. I want to know more about that translator too.
The translator is her apprentice.
Okay. And so does the translator have any quirks that make them more than just a tool?
Well, okay. The concept is that the translator is kind of her semi apprentice, and she's much more modernized, kind of like the millennial to the old person,
Yeah.
and speaks more of that traditional English, and is more into non-traditional stuff.
Yes.
And but she's clearly loyal, of course, to her teacher, and tries to develop her language the best way she can, even if she doesn't even always understand it.
Absolutely. Awesome. That is so cool. Definitely. That is something really unique. So it's untranslated to the audience. And that does say a lot about her as who she is. That is really, really neat. Thank you for sharing that. I think one that I wrote, oh, so tough. I got so many characters swimming in my head.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to say that I like the idea of using facial expressions as dialogue. That's
Yes.
really clever.
You're right. That is really good. Let's see. Oh, man, I can't even think of anything right now. So I did have some Western I was working on, and that was immediately post-Civil War, so April of 1865. And so that has its own, that comes with its own set of, dialogue patterns and speech habits between, uh, lower, middle, and upper class people, and of course, even between genders. So I have a female character who is from the upper class, and she heads west after the end of the Civil War, and she is actually more reserved, so she doesn't speak much. And I think that would say something about her speech patterns, as she remains very reserved, which makes it very hard to get a read on her, and something, of course, that I have to fix. But at the same time, it can speak enough about her and her upbringing and her social stature. I think her love interest in that story is more interesting, because he ended up on an opposite side. He ended up becoming a cavalry officer, and so he picks up, of course, soldiers' talk and soldiers' vocabulary, as well as a blended. So his accent gets diminished from his time spent around so many other people with different accents. And when he heads west with cavalry to, do fun army things out there, for lack of longer explanation, he ends up meeting up with her, but she can tell his speech patterns have changed, and he is more of a middle class. He was raised as more middle class, but being around a lot of soldiers has diminished some of the speech patterns that she used to recognize from him. But there is some accent, but I keep it light. I don't want to overwhelm. I do have an Irish character that says funny things that once you interpret them, you're like, oh, that's what that means. And that's because I've actually seen, that's the way I've seen other Irish people actually talk about how to interpret some of these things. So that's fun. And okay, so moving on, dialogue to disclose information. So the readers, should be learning something about the story and the characters when they read your dialogue. It should contain basic, dry facts that readers need to get the message of your story, but not go into full exposition. So, of course, whenever we read, we need some of the facts revealed through dialogue, such as a traumatic event that happened in a character's childhood, but too much exposition can bore readers. So how do we do it subtly? How do we, say that someone suffered trauma as a child without, having them explain it for the first time to, somebody that they're supposed to already know? I hate when I see that in a story, somebody speaking to tell an entire story in a very, very unnatural way. And I think that's what lends to unnatural dialogue, is exposition. So think, I guess, of, let's see.
Wouldn't that also be like show versus tell?
It is, except it's for dialogue. So
Yeah,
it's called,
like
it's the same concept. Same concept, except very, very specifically focused in dialogue. So in exposition, so what about you, Becky? Have you ever had that where you read so much dialogue that's just telling, versus being natural, that it became boring?
Yeah, I almost risked that in this story because, one of the characters gets stuck out in the woods overnight and she's injured, and she's accidentally stranded there by her partner and on a hike, and so she's out in the woods and she's like talking to herself, and she's like, talking to God, and she's like thinking in her head. I'm like, okay, I gotta break this up.
Yeah.
It was just like, it was like word vomit, that's all she was doing, and it was like, okay, stop. She needs to do something else besides talk, because I was getting bored writing it, and I was like, I know if I'm getting bored writing it, the reader's not going to do well.
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week with, we don't walk through each of the characters' individual actions if they're going to go make mac and cheese, and those actions don't lend itself to increasing tension in the plot, So, right? Does that feel about right?
Yeah. Unless they're setting the mac and cheese on fire.
Exactly. So if that, the pot of water catches on fire, and of course then the fire department has to be called, and it causes the neighbors to stare at
Awesome.
them, and somebody has anxiety issues.
Yeah.
It could really be important to the plot, but otherwise we don't need to know all the steps to make mac and cheese. But Carol, can you think of any books that you ever had to put down because it was just too boring because it did so much exposition rather than having that natural dialogue that subtly revealed important character points?
Okay, so I'm trying to think of that book right now. A book right now. Oh yeah, I do like just about all of Jane Austen book, but I think sometimes they do fall into these traps because they are kind of very dialogue driven.
Yes.
I do understand it on its own term. It does give the feel of the Regency period where, yeah, there was a lot of leisure to talk.
Yeah.
But sometimes it does dispenses too much. Like, okay, like this happens and this.
Yep.
But I think the book that really grinded my gears, exposition was, believe it or not, Atlas Shrugged.
Okay.
And that is a very, very dialogue-driven book, but unlike the Jane Austen books, it did not create that space on its own terms for it to be very dialogue-driven. It's just characters being a drag, talking about philosophy and this and this.
Yep, exactly. So it's really, it sounds more like preaching, doesn't it?
Exactly. That's kind of what the book is famous for, too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think The Iron Heel by Jack London falls into that. So a lot of his, so he has this, basically the wife of this guy who died who's a famous rebel. And she basically tells everybody the story of his, excuse me. She tells the story of her late husband's entire life, basically. And it's like, oh my God, it is so obnoxious, written in that way. And it was so boring. The only reason I finished that book was because I had it assigned to me for a class in my program. There was like no getting out of it. But it was something I really had to force myself to get through because I'm like, okay, so, basically Jack London is cheating. He's having a character be in a position to narrate or retell to other characters what happened so that he doesn't actually have to work on this book. Oh my goodness. So has anybody else read The Iron Heel, or am I laughing to myself?
Iron Heel. Who's it by?
Jack London.
I have not read it.
What's it about?
It's about basically fascist governments after the early 1900s, and of course the widening gap between the poor and the rich. And it's a very Jack London was known to be a socialist, so it's basically just sharing his speculative fiction into the rise of a fascist government. So and of course, talking about the evils of capitalism. So, and that's not even, that's not, that's just the basis of the book. But, it's really hard to get through it just because it's mostly all in dialogue, and with the late wife of the main character that's in the story telling the entire story. So, and it's just very unnatural dialogue. It's like he rushed through it. So, but yeah, it's an interesting read, especially to look back at that time and see that feeling, those thoughts and feelings haven't gone away. So even though he wrote it at the beginning of the 20th century. So, but anyway, yeah. So that covers 3 good books that were simply too boring. Now, dialogue to disclose information. So here's a good example here from Harry Potter. Voldemort took your blood, believing it would strengthen him. He took into his body a tiny part of the enchantment your mother laid upon you when she died for you. His body keeps your sacrifice alive, and while that enchantment survives, so do you, and so does Voldemort's one last hope for himself. Now, here we get enough information through dialogue without excessive exposition. We learn enough about what's keeping the sacrifice alive, that enchantment, surviving, right? But we don't say, we don't go through all the tiny actions of what his mother did to set that enchantment on him before she died. We don't have to, hear Dumbledore say, yeah, at first she did this and she did X and Y and Z and then this. No, it's very subtly done, and it's done in a way that is more poetic to the, well, of course, the plot. It really does add to the plot. So what do you guys think? Do we have Harry Potter fans here?
I'm a big reader of Harry Potter.
Awesome. So do you feel like you have this a lot in Harry Potter, where you get this dialogue that discloses just enough in a way like a mentor would share with you, just like Dumbledore here did here?
Yeah, from what I recall, I like little pinches of information.
Yes. Without being overwhelmingly telling, right?
Yeah, I don't think I remember too much about it being overwhelming, honestly.
Yeah, it's a page. They're all page turners, right? Because I mean, that's what she's known for. That's what J.K. Rowling's known for. So that's so cool. What about you, Becky?
I'm not, but I do also notice it in Lord of the Rings and Terry Pratchett both.
Yeah, in like a really good way, right?
Yeah, well, like I don't know. I think a lot of those British fantasy authors, like Neil Gaiman, Terry Pratchett, even like George R.R. Martin in Game of Thrones. They tend to, anyone who like grew up on Lord of the Rings, they kind of like, because you think of Gandalf's dialogue.
Yes.
It's got it's very
He's got
poetic.
that mentor feel. Yeah,
right, but it's
poetic.
like it's short, sweet, and to the point, while without sacrificing like the lyrical, poetic quality
Yes.
of the fantasy genre.
And who's gritty but does well at the same, giving us information without overdoing it? Stephen King. He will give us dialogue that gives just enough. Think of Pet Sematary.
Yep.
Think of Pet Sematary. That is a perfect example of using that dialogue with his neighbor there, using dialogue to add to the plot and disclose just enough information, right?
Yeah.
So, awesome.
Yeah, and he did it. He did it kind of in The Shining too.
Oh yeah. I really think every time he uses dialogue, it's like just like Louis L'Amour, it's always advancing the plot somehow. So dialogue needs to flow. So this is one thing that Becky and I, because we're writing buddies, so we have found out no matter what, whether it's dialogue or even any kind of descriptive writing, whatever we're writing, we have to read it aloud. So and then of course, Carol, you'll definitely relate to that, treating a dialogue like lines from a play. We can recruit friends and family to read with us. And of course, it can be scary to read aloud, but it is so helpful to catching all the mistakes, to catching all the parts where it doesn't feel natural, or where it starts to feel like up here it says overly wordy. Oh my goodness. Sometimes I've caught myself doing that, and I'm like, there's no way anybody would speak like that. So do you read it aloud, Carol?
In my head, honestly.
Yeah.
It is so much different when you like actually read it aloud. And one of the ways I found is I wait until everyone in my house is gone. And I have 4 boys. They're 18, 19, and 2 20-year-olds. And and my husband, who's retired. So anytime they're all out of the house, I'll just, hop on my work in progress, and I will read it to my dog, and she just like looks at me with like this rapt attention, like I'm just telling her like the best thing ever, because she's a golden retriever, but I mean, I can read it. Someone's actually listening. I feel like someone's actually listening, and there's no background noise. And I catch so many errors that way.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel comfortable reading it aloud, another way is if you have a tablet, or if your computer will do it, or your phone, have it read it aloud to you. Like have Siri read it aloud to you,
Yes.
and you will catch so many. Maggie, Phyllis Duncan, she does that.
Yes. I've done that before too. I used to have on my Kindle, I used to highlight different text from, I would upload a PDF or something, and it could read it for me. I think that's how it was. I had it reading my stuff. So, and I found, cause I would actually put my work into Kindle. So, I can have that format to look at it and hear it. But yes, so here's a couple tips for making it flow more naturally. So make sure we're being mindful of dialogue tags. Now, this is something I'm definitely guilty of myself, and I go through first draft, I'll do it like crazy, and then I'll just edit the stuff out as I go back through. It can be hard sometimes to not use like he said or she spoke, or excitedly. Oh my God, my adverbs are through the roof. It's definitely one of the biggest things that I have to fix when I go through Grammarly and AutoCrit. But it's still, something I'm getting better at, something we can all get better at.
Stephen King said the road to hell is paved with adverbs.
I know, but he's such a stickler. He's a funny guy. So I want them sometimes. And I've seen a lot of good writing that has adverbs. So I'm not totally against them. Don't tell Stephen I said that.
Your secret's safe with me.
I do like this example in the back, though. The back end here is Miguel leapt up from his chair. I love when I see dialogue that is followed by an action. So we get kind of what is going on all at once, because, we move when we speak. We're always doing a little bit of something. So we don't do just one thing at a time. And that is exactly what the next point is about, but keep the dialogue length varied. So some of the characters are wordier when they speak, like, for example, right now you guys are speaking a little bit and then I'm, speaking a lot. So we would have that differentiation, not all the characters would have equal lengths of dialogue. And then break it up with inserts of prose. Again, depict action, drive the plot, keep the reader from getting bored. And I think that's definitely one of the biggest things that threw me off about Pride and Prejudice, was there was not enough prose in between all the dialogue. So, and this is a great opportunity to practice internal monologue for your character, when you're trying to break it up a little bit, because dialogue that sounds natural and flows really well when it's concise. So subtext. So Carol, are you like all about the subtext?
Subtext as in...
Okay, so like the layers of hidden meaning within dialogue.
Okay, what's the best way for me to put it? Okay, so I suppose back to that dystopia idea I had, when the little girl is talking to her dying mother in the opening, and her mother is telling her, "Why did you get chocolate?" Mm-hmm. I think it's a dialogue that kind of speaks to the fear of both of them, where her daughter survived without her mother's guidance, and the daughter seeming like thinking, "Okay, how long does my mom have in this world?"
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And another way of thinking about it, so as we continue with this, so that's a great example. When we speak, we don't always say exactly what we're thinking, or exactly what we mean even. We can say something like, the infamous example of, oh, I'm fine, in a relationship. If she says I'm fine, she's definitely not fine, right? So
I love that meme.
Isn't that awesome? I love that so much. And then I like this example from Harry Potter. So Ron accuses, I cannot say that name for life of me, and I've heard it like 100 million times because I've watched the
Hermione.
Hermione. Yeah. Okay. So He accuses her of fraternizing with the enemy, not because she actually was hanging out with the enemy, but she attended a ball with some different guy and he wanted to be the one dancing with her. He can't say what he's really thinking because he either hasn't rationalized his feelings or because he's too embarrassed to admit that he likes her as more than a friend, of course, early on. So, try writing a brief caption, a brief passage in which your main character is having a difficult conversation with a friend or family member. And what are some of the giveaways in their dialogue that might indicate how they really feel? Are they putting on a poker face, but feel angry with the other person? So, excuse my mess up. So, go ahead and write like 2 to 3 lines of dialogue to, that we could talk about to, give subtext. All right. Anybody ready to go first? Becky?
Sure. I'm like, so I'm like, how come she can't hear me?
Oh,
And then, like, when you're talking, I realize I'm unmuted, and I'm like, darn it. Let me
that's
mute real quick.
hilarious.
Okay. So in this scene, Tucker has just, the doctor has just explained that there's a clinical trial that helps with dementia patients. And I'll take it, Tucker agreed, his hands relaxing. Hun, wait until we hear everything Dr. Spaulding has to say. Mr. Mason, let me re-emphasize that this isn't a cure. You're never going to recover from your symptoms, and eventually, even with medication, they could become worse. You might experience new symptoms or side effects of the medication. Tucker shook his head. No, Doc, I'm ready now. But Tucker, Caroline started, and her husband cut her off. Caroline, I see what this is doing to you. You haven't had a decent night's sleep since we moved. I've made up my mind. This is for you as much as it is for me. Turning to Dr. Spaulding, he repeated, my mind's made up. Let me sign the papers. Are you sure, hon? What if it goes wrong? Caroline blinked away the tears starting to spill over her eyelashes. Tucker reached out and held his wife's cheek in his palm. Looking into her eyes, he said, sweetheart, I never want to look at you and not know that you're the love of my life.
Aww. Oh my goodness. So what's the subtext? What is he saying but not saying?
Like, it's kind of emphasized that he keeps saying, you're the love of my life, you're the love of my life, and then like halfway through he reveals that, like, 7 years into their marriage there was a 7-year itch kind of situation.
Yeah.
And
But do you think that dialogue in particular has subtext? Like there's something he's not actually saying but we're trying to get across that he's saying? Like his real message, like maybe maybe if the doctor's saying, well, you should hear all the stuff first, he's like, maybe the doctor's actually saying, I am not a fan of this yet.
Yeah, the doctor's like, because it's brand new.
Yeah.
And we should really read more about it. And the doctor's kind of insistent.
So he's using his professional vocabulary and hiding and not outright saying how he really feels, right?
And Caroline, she's like trying to be gentle, because she respects that it's really her husband's decision.
Yeah.
But she's not really a fan of it. And he's like, but when he tells her this, she's just, okay, we're going to do what you want.
Yeah. Oh, man. So, Carol, are you ready to share or would you like me to go?
Okay, so here's something I typed out, conceptual thing out of an idea I had. Okay.
That's okay.
Here it is. So I suppose the funeral was going smoothly. Everything was going right. Ilya shot her a glare. I suppose Mum was sleeping as peacefully as a soldier. Oh, it was a closed coffin. I was there the whole time. Ilya smirked as she crossed her arms, shooting Lee an expression of victory. Mother was always so private. And that's it.
Okay. Awesome. So what is the subtext? What are they trying to say, or what thing is being hidden that either one of them won't say outright?
One was not really involved with the funeral, and the other was at the funeral. So the other one is trying to tell her, hey, I was the true daughter here. You weren't there.
Yeah.
And the other one, even though she wasn't as involved, she is still in some ways trying to probe information about this event she wasn't even there for.
Yeah.
And to even comment and probably even vent her own frustration about her late mother.
Yeah. Awesome. So is this the sci-fi one or the dystopian?
This is the sci-fi one.
Awesome. So that's what I figured first, but All right. So here is my little bit. I hope you guys like it. So, you really want to go to the funeral. Reese raised an eyebrow as he passed her a cup of coffee. Of course I do, Lucia grumbled. Poured, not passed, sorry. He poured her a cup of coffee. Of course I do, Lucia grumbled while rubbing her temples. Why not? Oh, I don't know. He pushed the coffee across the counter to her, his annoyance evident in the splashes that trailed the cup. He was an abusive pothead who gaslighted you for 3 years. Besides, I'm sure there'll be some of Owen's men watching the funeral. He paused to look up at her, hope and pain mingled in his hazel eyes. Do I convey that there's some subtext there in this very, very rough draft?
I think so, yeah.
So what do you think he really wants, or really how he really feels that he won't say outright? It's a short example.
Yeah.
Not a trick question, I promise.
Sorry.
I was just like hoping, like, so basically he's jealous that she, is so upset. You know what I mean? Even though it's
Yeah.
natural, he knows
There's
it's
definitely
natural.
like
He can't
different
help
levels
being
of grief
jealous.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he can't help but be jealous of this other person that she was with, even though that person is dead. Awesome. Fun. What do you think, Carol?
I'm sorry, what?
What did you think of that little attempt at subtext?
Honestly, I blanked out. Can you read it?
Okay. No, I'm saying, okay, so you really want to go to the funeral? Reese raised an eyebrow as he poured her a cup of coffee. Of course I do, Lucia grumbled while rubbing her temples. Why not? Oh, I don't know. He pushed the coffee across the counter to her, his annoyance evident in the splashes that trailed the cup. He was an abusive pothead who gaslighted you for 3 years. Besides, I'm sure there'll be some of Owen's men watching the funeral. He paused to look up at her, hope and pain mingled in his hazel eyes.
Okay, so much like mine, there's a funeral comfort.
Yeah, I know. I was like,
One of
when
the
I heard you say funeral, I was like, oh
and
my
yeah,
God, we both wrote about
yeah, this
funerals.
one's it's told much more to the action and the reaction, like them kind of venting their own frustration and wondering and trying to like probe into their curiosity about how the other actually feels about it.
Yes, absolutely. That's right on. Like, why do you really want to go? Do you still love him? Yes, absolutely. Fun, fun, fun. Awesome. So here's a little thing, and of course, from one of our favorite examples. Oh my God. May I ask to what these questions tend? Merely to the illustration of your character, I'm trying to make it out. And what is your success? I do not get on at all. I hear such different accounts of you as puzzle me exceedingly. Oh my God. Isn't that so hard to read? And everybody knows what example that's from, right?
Well, duh is on the card. Pride and
Yeah.
Prejudice.
Huh?
Pride and Prejudice.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I've read it and enjoyed it so much, but it is like, wow, is that seriously dialogue? And that's the ultimate of people trying to hide what they're really saying. They're trying to say something without saying it outright because of course it wouldn't be proper, right? So that was the extreme example. Now, real quick, dialogue in different languages. I definitely want to not keep you guys too much longer. It's getting late, but dialogue in different languages. So you already touched on this, which is amazing. But what if my character speaks a foreign language? And that's a question like so many of us ask. Can we include foreign words and phrases? And of course, there's a couple tips here just for that. And one of our other authors does include, because of her novel's topic matter or subject matter, she includes some Russian to indicate the foreign origin of some of her characters. So One tip is to offer an English translation in your narrative after your character speaks a foreign language. Then the reader can have a good idea of what's being said. And if it's not a common phrase like thank you in Japanese, followed by a polite bow, then you don't necessarily need to translate it. If you infuse your character's English dialogue with a little bit of their native language, then, or you can infuse it if their native language is not English. And of course, using nonverbal communication. This is one of my favorite that Louis L'Amour does really well. His nonverbal communication and his reading on body language in people comes through in his novels. And if you know anything about body language, you're like, oh my goodness, we know what's going to happen next. So anyway, you can also use that nonverbal communication to describe foreign customs or attitudes. So now, Carol, you said you're already doing this. You're having one character speak in Japanese, and then of course it actually adds to the dialogue because it's really part of who that character is. And so do you feel like it's at a point or will be at a point where it's going to confuse and frustrate the reader, or do you keep her parts pretty brief so that the other characters have a chance to provide context and help the reader through?
So the idea, of course, is in progress right now.
Yeah.
And I personally plan to just keep it concise.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's a great plan because it sounds so perfect, and that'll give the other characters a chance to help the reader understand what they understand of her. And maybe that's, like in your other work, more important. Other people's perceptions of a certain character can be very telling. So okay, some really quick rules for your dialogue here. It's not just a set of rules. We can have some variation. We can break the rules or bend them. Your character can't sound intelligent all of the time. I think this is something we do a lot, and when we begin writing, is we always have the good characters sound really, really smart, and our bad characters sound of course, really stupid or something. So your character doesn't always say what they're thinking. Now, we're just like in real life, we're not always straightforward. I mean, I try to be, but that's why I could call them blunt. But anyway, occasionally characters really can just engage in small talk, and I like setting up small talk for something else to happen. And we talked about this last week, actually, like lulling the reader into a false sense of security or safety, just to deliver a big blow. So if you're unsure if you've gone overboard with your dialogue, then just get a writing buddy to look it over. And that's something you can do in Sprints and Spirits too, is find a writing buddy. We offer that on the first of the month. We try to send out a thread where people can say, hey, I need a new writing buddy this month, or something like that. But anyway, not everyone who lives in a certain geographical area speaks the same way, even if they were born and raised there. And I think in my area of West Virginia, and Becky's only 25 minutes away from me, that is more apparent than I ever could have imagined. So there are people here who sound like I imagine people from West Virginia would sound. And then there are people who are born and raised here who basically have a standard American accent. I don't get it. Maybe Becky can explain that one. What do you think, Becky?
I think with the casino being right here, we get a lot of people who come to play. Like, they come, and I know especially like in our county, because Audrey and I are in neighboring counties, but especially where we are, we're seeing kind of the Atlantic City effect, where people come and they gamble away everything they own, and we're starting to see the effects of gambling addiction. And that's definitely starting with it's starting to mess with the dialogue.
Oh,
Because
really?
these people are from other places, but like, they're homeless, and they're like sitting around McDonald's, or they're like sitting in Martin's at the middle of the night.
In that case, I think it would be also even more have a greater effect, that this
Mhm.
is one of the fastest growing areas in the
Yeah.
United States because of its
And
proximity to DC.
right.
So a lot of people are moving here from other
Mhm.
areas because you can't afford to live much closer to
Exactly.
DC.
And
So
the MARC train is right here. So you
yep.
get people from DC, from Baltimore, from Philadelphia, from Pittsburgh, from Morgantown, and they want
Yeah,
to
or
live in
moving anywhere from
yeah,
across the country, they have to come to DC for jobs.
right. And they're
Then
living here because the taxes are like the real estate taxes are
taxes
cheaper, the houses are cheaper, the
and
cost of
everything's
living.
cheaper.
Yeah, everything's cheaper in West Virginia, and but then they're they're going out of state to work. But then like when they're here, like you said, the dialogue, and even not just not just Caucasians, like like where we live, like down on the river, there is this little set of houses, and like 3 Hispanic families have moved in there. And like when you go by on the weekends, that whole stretch of, you know, it's like a new little ethnic area within the county that wasn't here. Like I'm gonna say like 5-10 years ago, like it wasn't there at all,
Yeah.
and now it is. And it's neat though, because these people, these different people that we're meeting, they have such great stories, and they're, like you said, their dialogue is such a part of them.
Yes.
So like if I were gonna write about someone like, you know, like the older people who came from like, Pittsburgh, and they gambled away everything, and now they just like go around from like one all night place to the other, you know, talking to them. They're, even though they're from like, I think they're from the northern panhandle of West Virginia, but
Yeah.
their dialogue is like totally different than ours.
Yeah.
So
It
It
really
is just-
is. Yeah.
it's hard to explain, but they just have like, different speech patterns, and like just the different way they say things.
Well, for an example, isn't Julie from around here?
She is.
And she has a standard accent. I would swear it.
Yeah. Yep. She grew up here mostly like in middle school and high school, but her mom moved around like between the Carolinas and here.
Yeah. You'd think
Yeah.
they'd still keep an accent that way, but
But yeah, she definitely has an accent. So, but like Alicia in our writing group, she lives here,
mhm.
but she's from upstate New York,
Yeah.
and you can definitely tell that, even though she lives here, you can definitely tell that when she talks, not only by she's got a slight accent, but like her words are like very, her way of talking, like she talks a little fast.
Yeah.
And I almost want to say like there's a little bit of Valley Girl in it, like the 80s kind of,
Yeah, yeah.
you
And
know,
you know what's
that
funny
kind of-
is that it's actually named for a specific area, but
Mhm.
it swept the nation.
It did.
So that's no longer like a geographical indicator.
Yeah, definitely.
That's so awesome. So, yep. Let's see. Again, okay to use some foreign dialogue within moderation. Carol's already got a great plan for that. It actually sounds so freaking cool. It's okay to be abstract if something can't be said well with words. So, I think we've definitely done that before. And I love this.
Tamara just asked about that,
What?
about asking about the foreign language. Like she had a character
Yes.
who was like from Albania,
Ukraine.
or Russia. Yeah,
Ukraine. Yeah.
Yep. And then Maggie was giving her some advice, and that was
Yep.
really cool. I liked reading through that.
That was awesome. All right. So that is about it. Thank you guys so much for showing up. Give me some thoughts real quick. How did you like this? Do you feel it gave you some food for thought?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Oh
What do you think?
yes. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it gave me a lot of thought about dialogue, but the give and take thing was probably the most helpful thing, where something gets resolved or something doesn't in conversation.
Yeah. And the power dynamics between two people, because it's going to be different in between every set of people. There's always going to be someone who's more dominant, or, I mean, in those rare cases, people who are equally dominant and assertive. So that's an interesting. I like thinking about that more. Those relationship dynamics. Yay, I'm so glad it was enjoyable. So what do you think, Carol? Besides that one awesome part, did you enjoy overall?
Oh yes, I enjoyed overall. It's good to recap the normal stuff and good to learn a bit of new tips along the way.
Exactly. I kind of like to make it this mid-level thing. So we cover a little bit of fundamentals, but really dig into the gems. So awesome. Thank you guys so much for showing up tonight. And I cannot wait to see you in the group. Again, I'm going to go ahead and post the replay for anyone who has to watch this later. But thank you guys so much. I hope you have
Thank
a
you, Audrey.
wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.